Hey everybody, it's Brooks Hitzfield with Seven Sons and GrazeCart, and this is going to be a step-by-step walkthrough for how to export your GrazeCart transactions into QuickBooks Online. Now this is what we would call a third-party integration, meaning that there is a middle application that is needed for the import to work properly. And that application is called Transacrtion Pro, which is where I'm at right now. If you head to transactionpro.com, this is the app that basically will take data from GrazeCart and transfer that into something that QuickBooks can read. So the process is going to be fairly rigid, and it has a little bit of a learning curve. But if you found that it's necessary to have your individual transactions from GrazeCart into your QuickBooks account, and maybe you just haven't found a good way to do it, or you're still importing the data manually, this process is going to save you a lot of time. So again, this is an entirely separate service from GrazeCart, and it starts out at, I believe, $13 a month. So if you head to transactionpro.com, you're going to want to go to products. They have a couple different solutions. And what you're looking for is import transactions list into QuickBooks Online. It looks like this starts at $12.50 a month. And let's see here, but I believe you can start with a 30-day risk-free trial. So if you just follow the link here to set up your account and put in all of the information that it asks, the next thing you'll want to do is have a couple settings set up in your GrazeCart account that's going to allow you to pull your transaction data from GrazeCart. So go ahead and log into your account. I'm going to log into my test account that I have set up. Oop, looks like I typed that in wrong. Okay. So what you want to do is head to your settings. If you go to your order settings, there's this bottom field down here called Order Export Plugin. You're going to want to be sure that that is set to enable. What this is going to allow us to do is take all of our order transactions, and it gives us the ability to export the data into what we would call a CSV file. So to give you this option here, export for Transacrtion Pro, without that setting enabled, you're not even going to see this option. But let's go ahead and click it and give our file a name, test export for trans. Okay, and I just saved that to my downloads, but of course you can send it wherever you like. Let's go ahead and open up the CSV file so you guys can take a peek at what we're working with. So this is kind of what the data will look like inside the file. Every single one of these columns here will basically, Transacrtion Pro will take one of these columns and import them as a field into QuickBooks for either a sales receipt or an invoice, whatever type of transaction we want to import that as. So let's head back to our Transacrtion Pro account. Okay, so once you have your account created, you'll land on this screen here after you log in. Go ahead and go to Start Import. And here is where you will choose the file to import the transaction as. So if you're not taking credit card payments and you're still receiving cash and check, you're going to import everything as invoices. Now if you've already received a payment, that would be something you'd want to import as a sales receipt. So like a credit card or debit card transaction that you already have a payment for, you'd want to import as a sales receipt. And this example in this video, we're going to go through importing an invoice, and I'll do an entirely separate video for importing sales receipts just because the process is a little different, and there's a couple tips and best practice I want to show you on that. So let's just go ahead and click invoice this time. I want to head back to my, let's see, where's my file at? Okay, test export into Transacrtion Pro. So we just simply drag and drop it here. It doesn't look like my screen is filming far enough down, but the next button you would click is this green button in the bottom right that says Select File and Sheet. We can see this is the correct sheet that we want. Now here is where we decide how to map the fields on our CSV file to a field in QuickBooks. So this left column here are QuickBooks fields, column on the right are going to be fields from GrazeCart on that CSV file. So you can kind of map these how you'd like, and once you decide how you want these to map and you're really happy with it, you can go ahead and save your mapping options. That's what I've done here. I actually have a couple different options depending on if I'm importing a wholesale invoice or maybe a retail invoice. I even have a different one for an invoice that we import for our farm store orders. So again, you have a little bit of flexibility. As long as the data is on that export file from GrazeCart, you can map it to a field here in QuickBooks that's available through Transaction Pro. This default column on the right, that allows us to basically enter a static value for one of these QuickBooks fields if the data that we want is not on the CSV file. So there's a couple different applications that you could use that for. Say you wanted to put a private note, the same private note on every single invoice that we're importing, you could just put the note in here and it will import every transaction with this note on it. So again, that gives you a little bit more flexibility if you need some more information that's not on our CSV file that exports from GrazeCart. But I'm happy with the way this looks, and if you guys just for what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you a cheat sheet to help you guys out so you can kind of see if you're not real sure how to map these. I'll at least let you know how we've decided to map ours. That way you can kind of use it as a guide. And I'll put that in this blog post below. But since I'm happy with the way this looks, I'm going to go ahead and click Preview Import. Again, that's the green button down here at the right that you cannot see. It's going to give us a little preview of the data and showing you what information is being pulled for every single field here in QuickBooks. So you can kind of just scroll through here, make sure everything looks right before you actually send the files into QuickBooks. And I would highly recommend when you're doing this to just import one transaction at a time, just to test to make sure this is set up the way you guys want before loading in multiple or large volume of orders all at once. Because correcting incorrect work it's not easy once it's in QuickBooks. So anyways, I click the green button on the bottom right again, which says import. It's going to ask if I'm sure, and this loading process, it could take up to a few seconds or a few minutes depending on your internet speed and the volume of orders that you're importing. I'm just going to put it on pause here. It looks like it's taking a few minutes. Okay, so Transactions Pro, it will let you know if the import was successful or not. If it was unsuccessful, you will get an error message right here. Sometimes that error message will have information for why the import didn't go through. The most common thing I have found is that occasionally one of these fields will exceed the character limit that QuickBooks will allow. So you just need to go through the field and limit the characters to something a little bit smaller. But again, there can be more errors than that. Let's head to QuickBooks to go ahead and see what this transaction looks like. So I'm just going to refresh my page here in QuickBooks and go to my recent transactions. There we go. That's my test order for Brooks Hitsfield. Okay, so this looks pretty good. A couple things I wanna note is that you may notice that here in the display name, it includes the first, last name, and the email address. And that's because QuickBooks uses the display name as the unique identifier for every single customer account in QuickBooks. So this field has to be unique. So if we had two customers with the exact same name and we try to import both of those customers at once, it'll import both transactions into the same account actually. So this field always needs to be unique, and the easiest way we thought to do that was just to simply append the email address here. Another thing you're going to want to do is have all of your products set up in QuickBooks beforehand. That way when you import all of your orders, it'll actually search for products that are already in your system based off of the product name. And if you set them up beforehand, it just allows you to go ahead and set those products up into correct income accounts. Because if an order gets imported through Transaction Pro and the product is not already set up in QuickBooks, it'll go ahead and create a new product. and it'll assign the income to uncategorized income. So unless that's not a problem for you, I would recommend setting up all of your products in QuickBooks beforehand. And we actually, when we're setting up products, we match the SKU number, our SKU number from GrazeCart, into the product name actually in QuickBooks, because that's what Transaction Pro is looking for when they're looking for an item in QuickBooks. And if it doesn't find an identical match for the product name, it'll go ahead and create a new product. So the field that's least likely to change for us in GrazeCart is the SKU. That's why we use that, because occasionally we will change the name of our products in GrazeCart, and then when we go to import, it'll just create a duplicate of that item in QuickBooks for us. We import our sales channels as classes here in QuickBooks, so that's how we track our sales channels in QuickBooks. But again, you don't have to, that's just the way we do it. A couple things I want to mention about tax. We live, our farm here, Seven Sons, we're in Indiana, so we actually don't have sales tax on any groceries. So it's not something that we have to deal with a lot. But if you do live somewhere where you need to collect sales tax, you're going to want to be sure that in addition to your products being set up in QuickBooks beforehand, you're going to want your tax rates all set up in QuickBooks beforehand. And the way that the tax rate export from GrazeCart, that exports according to state. So let's go back to our CSV file to take a look at how this looks. If I go and find my tax rate, where is this at? Yeah, tax rate. So what it'll do is it'll create a name for the tax rate based off of the state or the address for your pickup location, or your address of your customer if you're delivering the order via a delivery zone. So basically it's either going to create the tax rate based off where the pickup location is located or where your customer lives if you're delivering the order directly to the customer. So this is what it's using for this field. It's an acronym for the state. So you're going to want to, when you set up your tax rates in QuickBooks, you're going to want to make sure that you name your tax rates according to the state. That way it finds an exact match. So I get that's not real intuitive, but I want to make sure I mention it for those of you who need to be collecting sales tax, because that's going to be real important that you make sure that your tax rates match the same name that's exporting here from GrazeCart. So if this order was for a pickup location in Ohio, you would see OH right here instead. So again, this is why I would recommend testing just a couple orders at once to make sure that you have these things set up right, because it might take a little bit of a couple tries to make sure that it's all set up correctly. But other than that, that's my last quick tip for exporting or importing invoice transactions. Again, I'm going to do a follow-up video on how we at Seven Sons would import our sales receipts or credit card transactions. So if you are taking credit card transactions, I recommend watching that video, because our process that we're doing it in a way that we make sure that all of our imported transactions from GrazeCart will end up reconciling with the Stripe deposits that hit our bank account. So the income from our credit card processors that hit our bank account, we want to make sure those reconcile with our incoming transactions. So we have a couple tricks for how to do that. So if you're interested in seeing that, go ahead and watch the next video. If you have any questions about this video, be sure to let us know. But other than that, thanks for watching.